Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the Gospel of Matthew. We're in Matthew chapter 27. We're going to be reading verses 27 through 31. Jesus has been delivered to be scourged. Last time we talked about the efforts that Pilate had made, the multiple efforts that Pilate had made to release Jesus because he knew him to be innocent. And we also mentioned that in ordering Jesus scourged before crucifixion was in itself, and it's hard for us to comprehend this, an act of mercy, because it meant that the time on the cross was going to be shortened. So let me describe what is going to be happening, the biomechanics of it all. And of course, we have the soldiers going further than Pilate offered or ordered and humiliating Jesus in this passage. But let me talk about what crucifixion is and what the scourging did, what scourging was for. If you want to see what a scourging looked like, I would call your attention to the movie The Passion of the Christ that Mel Gibson made with Jim Caviezel as Jesus. That is really, as far as we know, an historically accurate depiction of what the scourging would have looked like. I would not offer you that source as a depiction, a historical depiction of what crucifixion was like, because it isn't. And there are a lot of historical inaccuracies and inconsistencies and a few theological issues that I have with that movie, but man, the scourging scene is unwatchable, as you would expect if it was going to be historically accurate. Crucifixion is death by asphyxiation. It's death by strangling. And the way it works is this. You are nailed or roped to a cross, depending on how long you wanted to torture somebody. And you were therefore hung down this way so that your arms are reached up. And what happens is that the weight of your body pulls down and it constricts your diaphragm and your ability to exhale. The only way you can exhale is to pull yourself up. You can only do that for so long. You can do it for a pretty long time if you're tied up there. You can do it for less time if you're nailed up there because you're pulling yourself up by your wounds. But you could last for days, many days on the cross before you died. You would be prey to animals, birds, I should say, like ravens and other scavenging birds that would come pluck at you and torture you, and you just were struggling for each breath. The terrible part of it was you can inhale. You can inhale from a cross. You just can't exhale. And so you need air, and you'd keep inhaling until you nearly burst your lungs before you could pull yourself back up again. The scourging ahead of time was meant to limit your time on the cross, and it was literally the process of lacerating your back muscles, your latissimus dorsi and your back muscles, so that you would not have the power to pull yourself up, so that you strangled more quickly. And so you would be tied to a whipping post. This would have happened at the fortress of Antonia, there, where the Praetorian, or where the soldiers, stayed. And the pavement is still there. It's one of the few things that's still there from the time of Jesus. But the pavement from the fortress of Antonia, the cobblestones of the floor, they're still there, and you can go see them. And that might be the very spot that this took place. But there would have been a pillory, a whipping post, and you would have been tied to that, and then two soldiers, one on either side, would have just continually whacked you in the back with a rope, with a whip that would have been leather thongs, foot and a half, attached to a handle, and embedded in those thongs would be bits of metal and bone and stone, sharp ones, and it would just be overhand to your back, whack, 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 whack. They would have gotten into a rhythm, and it would have been up and down your back, and it would have been to crack your ribs and lacerate the muscles lacerate the muscles in your shoulders, in your lats, lacerate your lats, lacerate your lumbar muscles, lacerate the muscles in your back, and crack your ribs and perhaps even your spine, so that you were powerless to pull yourself up and allow yourself to breathe, so that your time on the cross was going to be brief. And that's what they did. The soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium, gathered the whole Roman cohort around him. So these are the troops that are in town. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And after weaving a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his hand, in his right hand. And they kneeled down before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spat on him and took the reed and began to beat him on the head. And after they had mocked him, they took his robe away and his garments from him and led him away to be crucified. On top of, in addition to the scourging, there is the humiliation. This is nothing but an expression of racism. The Romans hated the Jews. They hated them because they were Jews. They hated them as Jews. They just hated them as a different race that made their life miserable when they were stuck at this lousy outpost where they were serving their time in the Roman army. They hated them. And there's insult when they put the titleist up above Jesus' head. This is King of the Jews. It's not just true to what Jesus said about himself, but there was an insult to Judaism. There's just racism in all of this. I mean, I had talked about Emmett Till a few days ago and talking about what was happening to Jesus, and I'll mention him again. I mean, this is hatred. This is racial hatred being expressed against Jesus at this time. And that happens on top of the scourging that takes place. So this is the second time people are just taking out their hatred on Jesus, who was about to die for each one of them. And us as well. It's the one time in the New Testament in which we see Roman soldiers in a very bad light. And we're reminded that there's no saintly group, that there is no one righteous, no, not one, that all of us are worthy of being condemned, but for the grace of God. And that grace is about to be achieved for us through the blood of Jesus. We'll pick up with the crucifixion of Jesus in verse 32 next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.